I've always believed that fear is just another tool in the kit, a warning, a sharpened edge. But there's a difference between the fear you expect and the kind that creeps in, slow and cold, when you're wedged between stone and water, lungs burning, and something brushes past you in the dark. That's the kind of fear that makes you question everything you thought you knew. My helmet scraped the ceiling as I inched forward, the rock pressing against my back, the water pressing against my chest. My breath echoed in my mask, too loud, too fast. I tried to focus on the line in my hand, the only thing tethering me to the world above. Then, just as I thought I'd imagined the movement, something slick and cold slid past my leg. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't tell if it was a current, a fish, or something else. I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 3, and forced myself forward. That's what you do in a cave. You keep moving, no matter what. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the water, before the darkness, there was the arrival. The drive out to the site was long and silent, the kind of silence that settles in when everyone's thinking the same thing, but no one wants to say it. We were called in after a group of explorers went missing, 3 days overdue, no contact, and the local authorities too spooked to go in after them. I'd worked with most of the team before. Hard cases, steady hands. People who'd seen what caves could do to a body. But even they looked uneasy as we pulled up to the mouth of the cave, a black wound in the hillside, half swallowed by mist and moss. The local guide was waiting for us, arms crossed, eyes flicking from face to face. He was older than I expected, with a voice like gravel and a stare that made you feel like you'd already failed. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Instead, he handed us a battered notebook, the cover stained and warped from years of damp. Inside, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were the rules. Never dive alone. Never answer voices, no matter how familiar. Never touch the red stones. Always leave an offering at the entrance. And if you see your own reflection in the water, turn back. We all exchanged glances. I'd heard plenty of superstitions in my time. Every cave has its stories, but these felt different. The guide's hands shook as he spoke, and there was something in his eyes that made me want to believe him, just for a second. We suited up in silence, the rules echoing in my mind as I checked my gear. I tried to focus on the familiar rituals, checking my tanks, testing my lights, running my fingers along the guideline. But the words kept coming back, each one heavier than the last. We're trained to expect the worst. But nothing in my training prepared me for what waited in that darkness. We gathered at the edge of the cave, the morning air thick with mist and the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're trespassing. The rest of the team was already there, unloading gear and checking equipment with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this too many times before. There was Mark, my usual dive partner, steady, unflappable, the kind of guy who could find humor in a collapsed tunnel. Next to him was Lena, the medic, her face set in a determined frown as she double-checked the oxygen tanks. And then there was Harris, the youngest on the team, still new enough to be nervous but smart enough to hide it. The local guide, whose name I finally caught as Victor, watched us with a wary intensity. He didn't bother with small talk. Instead, he motioned us over to a flat rock near the entrance, where he'd laid out the battered notebook and a handful of small, strange objects, coins, a carved wooden figure, a strip of red cloth. Offerings, I realized, for the cave. Victor's voice was low and rough as he went over the rules again, his eyes never leaving ours. Never dive alone. Never answer voices, even if you know them. Never touch the red stones. Always leave an offering at the entrance. And if you see your own reflection in the water, turn back. No exceptions. Mark shot me a look, one eyebrow raised. I shrugged, trying to play it off, but I could feel the unease settling in my gut. We'd all heard stories, caves that swallowed people whole, tunnels that twisted back on themselves, places where the air felt wrong. But this was different. Victor wasn't just superstitious. He was scared. Lena tried to lighten the mood. What happens if we break a rule? The cave police come after us. Her laugh was thin, forced. Victor didn't smile. You don't want to find out, he said simply. We each took a turn, leaving an offering at the entrance. I placed a coin on the rock, feeling foolish but unwilling to tempt fate. Harris hesitated, then added a small plastic charm from his keychain. Victor nodded, satisfied, and we began suiting up. The first dive was supposed to be a simple recon. Follow the main tunnel, check for signs of the missing explorers, and lay a fresh guideline. The water was colder than I expected, seeping through my suit and settling in my bones. My breath sounded too loud in my ears, and every movement sent clouds of silt swirling in the beam of my headlamp. We moved in single file, Mark leading, me behind him, Lena and Harris bringing up the rear. The cave was tighter than most, the walls pressing in, the ceiling so low in places I had to turn my head sideways to fit. I kept my hand on the guideline, knuckles white, trying not to think about the rules. About 20 meters in, I heard it, a faint echo, like someone calling my name from far away. I stopped, heart pounding, and looked back. Lena shook her head, eyes wide. She'd heard it too. Mark signaled for us to keep moving, and I forced myself forward, telling myself it was just the acoustics, the way sound bounces in these tunnels. But then, as we rounded a bend, I realized the guideline was gone. It just ended, the frayed end floating in the current. Mark swore under his breath, and we all clustered together, lights darting over the walls, searching for any sign of the missing line. There was nothing, no break, no anchor, just empty water and stone. We doubled back, laying a new line as we went, nerves stretched tight. No one spoke. When we finally surfaced at the entrance, Victor was waiting, his face pale. "Did you hear anything?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. "Just echoes. Probably nothing." He didn't look convinced. Neither was I. I thought the rules were just local superstition until I saw what was waiting for us in the water. As we prepped for a deeper dive, the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. There's a rhythm to cave diving, a ritual that keeps you alive. Every movement is deliberate, every breath measured. You check your gear 3 times, then check your partners. You memorize the route, the air pressure, the backup plans. You learn to trust the guideline more than your own sense of direction, because in the dark, your mind will lie to you. The cave doesn't care how experienced you are. It only makes one mistake. We entered the water in silence, the world above shrinking to a memory as the cave swallowed us whole. The entrance tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for a single diver. My shoulders scraped the stone, and the silt rose in thick clouds behind us, turning the water to milk. I kept my hand on the line, feeling the tension in every muscle. Mark led the way, his light cutting a narrow path through the blackness. Lena followed, then Harris, his movements stiff and careful. The deeper we went, the colder it got. My breath fogged the inside of my mask, and I had to force myself to slow down, to keep from gulping air. The only sounds were the hiss of regulators and the distant drip of water echoing through the stone. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong. I told myself it was just nerves. We reached the first junction, a place where the tunnel split in two. Mark paused, checking the map on his wrist. He signaled left, and we followed the guideline taught between us. The walls here were streaked with red mineral deposits, veins of color running through the stone. I remembered Victor's warning, never touch the red stones. I kept my distance, even as curiosity tugged at me. About 30 meters in, Harris's voice crackled over the comms, thin and shaky. "Did you guys hear that?" He sounded younger than usual, the bravado stripped away. Mark replied, "Hear what?" Someone said my name. I swear I heard it, right behind me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I glanced back, but all I saw was Lena's light, bobbing in the gloom. "It's just the cave," I said, trying to sound confident. "Sound does weird things down here." But Harris didn't look convinced. He started to turn, as if to call out, but Lena grabbed his arm, shaking her head. "Don't," she mouthed, her eyes wide. I remembered the rule: never answer voices, even if you know them. We pressed on, the tension ratcheting higher with every meter. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing us to crawl, tanks scraping against the ceiling. My heart hammered in my chest, and I had to fight the urge to bolt. Panic is the real killer down here. You panic, you die. Then, just as we rounded a bend, Mark's light caught something on the bottom. He stopped, motioning for us to hold position. I squinted through the murk and saw it. A helmet, half buried in silt, the strap torn. Next to it, a length of guideline, frayed and floating, the end stained dark. I felt my stomach drop. This was no accident. Something had happened here. Lena moved closer, her hand trembling as she reached for the helmet. Mark stopped her with a sharp gesture. "Don't touch it," he said, voice tight. "We document, then move on." I scanned the area, looking for any sign of the missing explorers. There was nothing, no bubbles, no movement, just the silent accusation of abandoned gear. I tried to imagine what could have gone wrong. Equipment failure? Panic? Or something else? As we started to backtrack, I felt it again, a brush against my leg, too solid to be a current. I spun, light darting over the rocks, but there was nothing there. My pulse thundered in my ears. I almost called out to the voice I heard behind me. If I had, I might not be here to tell you this. We regrouped at the junction, everyone breathing hard, eyes wide behind their masks. Mark looked at each of us in turn, his face grim. We need to decide. Do we keep going, or pull out and call for backup? No one wanted to be the first to answer. The cave pressed in around us, silent and waiting. I could feel the rules hanging over us, heavier than the water. We were trained for bodies, for disaster, for the worst the earth could throw at us. But this was something else. And deep down, I think we all knew it. We argued in hushed voices, the kind that barely carry through water and stone. Mark wanted to push deeper, convinced the missing explorers had to be close. Lena was pale, her hands shaking as she checked her gauges, but she nodded along. Harris, though, was the one I watched most closely. He kept glancing over his shoulder, eyes darting to the shadows, as if he expected something to reach out and grab him. I tried to steady my breathing, to focus on the facts, but the rules kept echoing in my mind. Never answer voices. Never touch the red stones. We pressed on, the guideline our only lifeline. The tunnel sloped downward, the water growing colder, the darkness thicker. My light barely pierced the gloom. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of those red mineral veins, pulsing in the rock like veins under skin. I kept my distance, but Harris seemed drawn to them, his gaze lingering a little too long. We reached a chamber where the ceiling arched high above the water, so still it was like glass. Our lights flickered across the surface, and for a moment, I saw my own reflection staring back at me, distorted, ghostly. I looked away, heart pounding. Another rule: if you see your own reflection in the water, turn back. I didn't say anything. None of us did. Mark signaled for us to fan out, searching for any sign of the missing team. Lena and I moved left, Harris and Mark to the right. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hiss of our regulators and the occasional clink of metal on stone. I tried to focus on the search, but my mind kept drifting back to the rules, to Victor's haunted eyes. Then, through the comms, I heard it, a voice, faint and distant, calling Harris's name. It sounded wrong, stretched and echoing, but unmistakable. Harris froze, his light trembling. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Mark's voice was sharp. "Ignore it. Keep moving." But Harris didn't move. He turned, scanning the darkness, and the voice came again, closer this time. "Harris, help me." I wanted to shout, to grab him, but the water swallowed my words. I watched him reach for the stone, and I wanted to scream. By the time I did, it was already too late. His hand brushed one of the red veins, fingers lingering on the slick surface. The change was instant. The water around him seemed to ripple, the light bending and twisting. Harris's body went rigid, his eyes wide and unseeing. For a heartbeat, he just floated there, suspended in the water, and then he was gone, yanked backward into the darkness, the guideline snapping taut and then going slack. Lena screamed, bubbles streaming from her mask. Mark lunged forward, grabbing the line, but it was useless. Harris had vanished, swallowed by the cave. I felt a cold, crawling dread settle in my chest. This wasn't panic or equipment failure or any of the things we'd trained for. This was something else, something old and hungry. We regrouped, the three of us clinging to the guideline like it was the only thing keeping us alive. Mark's face was ashen, his hands shaking as he tried to reel in the broken line. Lena was sobbing, her mask fogged with tears. I tried to keep it together, to think like a rescuer, but my mind kept replaying the moment Harris touched the stone, the way the water seemed to swallow him whole. "We have to go after him," Lena choked out, but Mark shook his head. "No, we stick to the plan. We follow the rules." I nodded, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The cave felt different now, closer, more alive. The water pressed in from all sides, and every shadow seemed to move. I realized, with a sick certainty, that the rules weren't just superstition. They were warnings, carved out of fear and experience, passed down by people who'd seen what the cave could do. We started back toward the entrance, moving faster than before. Every so often, I thought I heard Harris's voice, calling from the darkness, begging for help. I forced myself to ignore it, to keep my eyes on the line, my mind on the rules. Never answer voices. Never touch the red stones. As we reached the junction, I looked back one last time. The chamber was empty, the water still as glass. But I could feel something watching us, waiting. We were one member down, and the cave felt more hostile than ever. I knew, deep down, that we were only just beginning to understand what we were up against. We stumbled out of the water, gasping for air, the three of us collapsing on the cold stone just inside the cave's mouth. Victor was waiting, his face drawn and pale, eyes flicking from one to the next, counting. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at the empty space where Harris should have been and nodded, as if he'd expected it all along. Mark tried to explain, his voice shaking, but Victor held up a hand. "You don't have to tell me," he said quietly. "I know what this place can do." He motioned for us to sit, and for a moment, we just listened to the sound of our own breathing, the distant drip of water echoing through the stone. Then Victor began to speak, his voice low and steady, the words heavy with memory. "This cave, it's older than any of us. Older than the maps, older than the stories. My father was a diver, too. He told me the rules when I was a boy, and I thought they were just old men's tales. But then I saw what happens when you break them." He paused, staring into the darkness beyond the entrance. "There was a team, years ago. 5 divers. All experienced, all confident. They laughed at the rules, called them superstitions. On their second day, one of them answered a voice he thought was his friend. Another picked up a red stone, said he wanted a souvenir. By the end of the week, only one came out. He was changed. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. Just stared at the water, like he was waiting for something to come back for him." Lena shivered, pulling her knees to her chest. Mark looked away, jaw clenched. I felt a cold knot of fear settle in my stomach. I'd always prided myself on being rational, on trusting training and experience over ghost stories. But Victor's eyes were haunted, and I could see the truth in them. He leaned closer, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The rules aren't just for you. They're for the cave, for whatever's down there. If you break them, you open a door you can't close." He repeated the rules, each one like a nail hammered into my mind. Never dive alone. Never answer voices, no matter how familiar. Never touch the red stones. Always leave an offering at the entrance. And if you see your own reflection in the water, turn back. He looked at each of us in turn, making sure we understood. If you want to live, you follow the rules. All of them. Every time. For the first time, I felt real fear, not just for myself, but for others. For Harris, wherever he was. For the explorers still missing. For anyone who might come after us. He told us about the last team that broke the rules. Only one made it out, and he was never the same. The cave seemed to listen, the darkness pressing in, hungry and patient. We sat in silence, the weight of Victor's words settling over us like a shroud. Finally, Mark broke the silence, his voice rough. "So what do we do now?" Victor didn't answer. He just looked at the entrance, the black water waiting, and I knew the decision was ours. Press on or retreat. Either way, the rules would follow us. We didn't speak much as we prepped for the next dive. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clink of metal and the hiss of air as we checked our tanks. Lena's hands shook as she adjusted her mask, and Mark's jaw was set, his eyes hard. Victor watched us from the shadows, his presence a silent warning. I tried to steady my breathing, to focus on the routine, but the rules echoed in my mind with every movement. Never dive alone. Never answer voices. Never touch the red stones. Always leave an offering. If you see your own reflection, turn back. We left another offering at the entrance, a silver ring from Lena, a battered coin from Mark, a strip of cloth from me. The ritual felt less foolish now, more like a lifeline. Then we slipped beneath the surface, the world above vanishing in a rush of bubbles and cold. The water was darker this time, the silt thicker, the current stronger. We moved in tight formation, Mark leading, Lena in the middle, me at the rear. The guideline was our only anchor, and I kept my hand wrapped tight around it, knuckles white. Every so often, I'd feel a tug, as if something unseen was testing our grip. We passed the chamber where Harris had vanished. None of us looked at the red stones. The water felt colder there, the silence deeper. I tried not to think about what might be watching from the shadows. As we pressed deeper, the cave began to change. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light, veins of red and gold flickering just beneath the surface. My headlamp flickered, the beam wavering, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes moving in the distance, pale, drifting forms that vanished when I tried to focus on them. Then the current shifted, sudden and violent, nearly tearing the guideline from my hand. Lena cried out, her voice muffled by the water, as she was swept sideways into a narrow crevice. Mark lunged after her, but the current was too strong. I fought my way toward them, heart pounding, the rules screaming in my mind. Lena's light vanished, swallowed by the rock. I heard her voice, faint and desperate, echoing through the calms. "Help me. Please, I can't." The words twisted, warping into something that wasn't her. "Come closer, just a little closer." I froze, every instinct screaming at me to answer, to call out. But I remembered Victor's warning. Never answer voices, no matter how familiar. I forced myself forward, following the guideline, ignoring the voices that clawed at the edge of my mind. I found Lena wedged in the crevice, her mask askew, eyes wild with panic. She was reaching for something, a glimmer of red stone just out of reach. I grabbed her wrist, pulling her back, shaking my head. She struggled, tears streaming down her face, but I held on, refusing to let her touch the stone. Mark appeared beside us, his face pale, and together we dragged Lena free. The current died as suddenly as it had begun, leaving us gasping and shaken. I checked Lena's gear, making sure she was okay, then looked back at the crevice. The red stone glimmered in the darkness, waiting. We regrouped, clinging to the guideline, the three of us breathing hard. The cave felt alive, the walls pulsing with a slow, hungry rhythm. I realized then that the rules weren't just for our safety, they were for everyone's. For the explorers who'd vanished. For Harris. For anyone who dared to enter this place. We pressed on, supplies running low, exhaustion dragging at our limbs. The way out seemed to shift, the tunnels twisting back on themselves, familiar landmarks vanishing. My sense of direction faltered, and for the first time, I felt truly lost. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of my own reflection in the water, pale and distorted, eyes wide with fear. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the guideline, on the rules. They were all we had left. By the time we surfaced in a small air pocket, we were spent. Lena sobbed quietly. Mark stared into the darkness, and I tried to steady my hands. The cave was closing in, the walls pressing tighter, the air growing thin. We were running out of time, and I knew the worst was yet to come. It happened so fast, I barely had time to react. One moment, I was following Mark and Lena through a narrow passage, the guideline taut between us. The next, a sudden surge of water slammed into my side. My grip slipped. The line snapped free from my hand, and I was spinning, tumbling through the black, the world reduced to bubbles and panic and the roar of my own heartbeat. I clawed at the water, desperate to find the line, but it was gone. My light flickered, casting wild shadows on the jagged walls. I tried to call out, but the comms were dead, nothing but static in my ears. I was alone, cut off, the cave pressing in from all sides. For a moment, I just floated, paralyzed by fear. My air gauge blinked a warning, less than a third of a tank left. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think. Training kicked in, the old mantras echoing in my mind. Don't panic. Find the line. Conserve air. But the rules were louder, pounding in my skull. Never dive alone. Never answer voices. Never touch the red stones. Always leave an offering. If you see your own reflection, turn back. I drifted through the darkness, every sense straining for a sign of the others. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of my regulator and the frantic thud of my heart. My light caught on something ahead, a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for my shoulders. I hesitated, dread coiling in my gut. I knew this passage. Victor had pointed it out on the map, calling it the dead end. He'd warned us never to go that way. But now, it was the only way forward. I was alone, out of air, and the only way forward was through a tunnel I swore I'd never enter. I squeezed into the passage, the rock scraping my tank, my mask pressed against the stone. My breath fogged the glass, and I had to fight the urge to rip it off, to scream. The tunnel twisted, tighter and tighter, until I thought I'd never make it through. My mind started to fracture, memories bleeding in, past rescues gone wrong, bodies wedged in impossible spaces, the look in a mother's eyes when I told her we'd found her son too late. I remembered my first recovery, the way my hands shook as I pulled the body free, the way the cave seemed to close in around me, hungry and cold. I remembered the nightmares that followed, the guilt that never really faded. I remembered Harris, his hand reaching for the red stone, his eyes wide with terror. A voice echoed through the water, soft and familiar. My father's voice calling my name. I froze, every muscle locked. He'd been gone for years, lost in a cave not so different from this one. I wanted to answer, to call out, but the rules screamed at me. Never answer voices, no matter how familiar. Tears stung my eyes. I pressed forward, forcing myself to ignore the voice, to focus on the tunnel, on the faint glimmer of light ahead. My air was almost gone, every breath a struggle. I could feel the cave watching, waiting for me to slip. At last, the tunnel widened, and I tumbled into a small chamber, gasping for air. My light flickered, then steadied, illuminating the walls. There, scratched into the stone, was a message, letters carved with desperate hands, the words jagged and uneven. Don't trust the water. It remembers. Below the message, a battered dive slate lay half buried in silt. I picked it up, hands trembling. The last entry was a warning, scrawled in shaky handwriting. If you see yourself, run. I stared at the words, heart pounding, the weight of the cave pressing down on me. I was alone, nearly out of air, and the only way out was forward, into the darkness, into whatever waited beyond. The rules were all I had left, and I clung to them like a lifeline, praying they'd be enough. The chamber was colder than any water I'd ever felt, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your heart stutter. My hands shook as I clutched the dive slate. The words etched into my mind. Don't trust the water. It remembers. If you see yourself, run. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale felt like knives in my chest. My air was almost gone. I had to move. I scanned the chamber, searching for any sign of a way out, any hint of Mark or Lena. The walls seemed to pulse, the veins of red and gold throbbing with a sickly light. The water pressed in, thick and heavy, and I realized with a jolt that the current was gone. The cave was holding its breath, waiting. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a pale shape drifting at the edge of my light. I swung my beam toward it, heart hammering. For a split second, I saw a face staring back at me, eyes wide and empty, mouth open in a silent scream. My own face, my own eyes. I jerked back, nearly dropping the slate. The rules screamed in my mind. If you see your own reflection, turn back. But there was nowhere to turn. The only way out was through. I forced myself forward, every muscle screaming in protest. The water grew colder, the darkness thicker. The walls seemed to close in, the passage narrowing until I could barely squeeze through. My light flickered, shadows writhing on the stone. I heard voices, Mark, Lena, Harris, my father, all calling my name, all begging for help. I clenched my jaw, refusing to answer, refusing to look back. Then, just as my lungs began to burn, I saw a faint glow ahead. I kicked toward it, desperate, and burst into a larger chamber. Mark was there, slumped against the wall, his mask cracked, his eyes glazed. Lena was beside him, clutching his hand, her own face streaked with tears. I swam to them, checking their gear, their air. Mark was barely conscious, his regulator slipping from his mouth. Lena's tank was almost empty. I forced myself to focus, to remember my training. I swapped Mark's regulator for my backup, checked Lena's pressure, and signaled for her to hold on. The cave shuddered, the walls groaning, the water swirling with impossible currents. The veins of red stone pulsed brighter, casting the chamber in a hellish glow. I felt something moving in the water, something vast and ancient, coiling around us, squeezing. I remembered Victor's words. The rules aren't just for you. They're for the cave, for whatever's down there. I looked at the offerings we'd left behind, the coin, the ring, the strip of cloth. I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around the battered dive slate. I pressed it into a crack in the wall, a final offering, a desperate plea. The cave seemed to pause, the currents stilling, the light dimming. I grabbed Mark and Lena, hauling them toward the exit, following the faint glimmer of the guideline. The voices grew louder, more insistent, clawing at my mind. I shut them out, focusing on the rules, on the rhythm of my breath, on the feel of the line in my hand. The passage narrowed, the walls pressing in, the water freezing. Mark slipped from my grasp, drifting toward a patch of red stone. I lunged after him, grabbing his arm, pulling him back. Lena screamed, her voice warping into something inhuman. I clung to the line, dragging them both forward, refusing to let go. The cave roared, the water churning, the walls closing in. I kicked harder, lungs burning, vision blurring. The exit was just ahead, a faint circle of light in the darkness. I shoved Mark and Lena through, following them into the cold, open water. We surfaced together, gasping for air, the cave's mouth yawning behind us. I looked back, half expecting to see the water boiling, the walls collapsing. But the cave was silent, the darkness impenetrable. If I failed now, it wouldn't just be me who paid the price. The cave would never let us go. We clung to each other, shivering, the rules echoing in my mind. We'd survived, but only just. And I knew, as I looked at the cave behind us, that it was still waiting, still hungry, still remembering every rule we'd broken. We lay sprawled on the rocks outside the cave, shivering and gasping, the world above blinding after so long in the dark. Mark coughed, his hands trembling as he tore off his mask. Lena just stared at the sky, her eyes wide and unblinking, as if she couldn't believe we'd really made it out. I pressed my palms to the cold stone, grounding myself, trying to slow my racing heart. Victor was there, waiting in the mist, his face grave but relieved. He didn't ask what happened. He just nodded, as if he already knew. I wanted to tell him everything. The voices, the shifting tunnels, the way the cave seemed to breathe and hunger. But the words stuck in my throat. Some things can't be explained. Some things are only understood by those who've survived. We sat in silence, the three of us huddled together, the cave at our backs. I looked at my hands, at the dirt and blood beneath my nails, and realized I'd left a part of myself down there. We all had. The rules had saved us, but they'd also changed us. I could feel it in the way my skin prickled, in the way the shadows seemed to move at the edge of my vision. Victor finally spoke, his voice low. The rules aren't just for you. They're for the cave, for what's inside. If you follow them, you keep it sleeping. If you break them, he trailed off, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the entrance. I understood then. The rules weren't just about survival. They were a bargain, a fragile peace between the living and whatever waited in the depths. Every offering, every whispered warning, was a way to keep the cave's hunger at bay. We'd come looking for bodies, for answers, but what we found was older and more dangerous than anything we'd trained for. We made it out, but I still hear the voices when I close my eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of cold water and red stone, of tunnels that twist back on themselves, of faces that aren't my own staring back from the dark. The cave let us go, but it didn't let us leave unchanged. As I packed my gear, preparing to leave this place behind, I knew I'd never truly escape it. The rules would follow me, echoing in my mind, a warning and a promise. And I knew, deep down, that the cave was still waiting, patient and hungry, for the next team to forget. I left the cave behind, but it never really left me. Even after the debriefings, the endless paperwork, the questions from people who would never understand, I felt its presence, like a weight in my chest, a shadow at my back. I tried to return to normal life, to the routines and rituals that used to make me feel safe. But every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the water, the rules echoing in my mind. A few weeks later, I got a call from the agency. Another team was being sent to the same region. Different cave, same risks. They wanted my notes, my advice. I hesitated, the phone cold in my hand, before finally agreeing to meet them. I found the new team at the edge of the forest, their gear spread out on the grass, their faces bright with the kind of confidence I remembered from my first dives. They asked about the currents, the layout, the best places to anchor a line. I answered their questions, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes when I mentioned the rules. So I wrote them down, every one, in the same battered notebook Victor had given me. I handed it to their leader, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice. She flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing as she read. "Superstition?" she asked, half smiling. I shook my head. "Call it what you want. But if you ever find yourself at the mouth of that cave, remember the rules. And pray you never have to use them." She tucked the notebook into her pack, and I watched as the team disappeared into the trees, their laughter fading into the mist. I wanted to call them back, to warn them again, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to survive. As I turned to leave, I glanced back at the cave's entrance, half hidden by moss and shadow. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the cave was listening, waiting. I wondered how many times this had happened before, how many teams had come and gone, how many warnings had been ignored. I left a final offering at the entrance, a simple coin pressed into the earth, and whispered the rules one last time. The forest was silent, the cave's mouth dark and patient. Maybe one day, someone will listen. Maybe the rules will be enough. Or maybe the cave will keep waiting, hungry and silent, for the next team to forget. Either way, the cycle continues. And somewhere, deep in the dark, the cave remembers every name, every voice, every broken rule.